Hello everyone, we are here for our usual live event. Today we have a topic which is a very interesting one. It's mesmerizing, it's fascinating, it's a really cool topic, if I say so myself. And today's topic is the science of spiritual ecstasy, and also the question that we pose here is enlightenment a cosmic orgasm? These are all good questions, and as many of you probably understand, these questions open the door to some very, very interesting concepts. So let's start by simply posing this simple question, and that is, the science of spiritual ecstasy, what exactly does it mean? Because for most people, when you say science and when you say ecstasy of any kind, most people don't see the connection, because we all think of science to be something very methodical, very, scientific, something which is part of the scientific system, where you imagine a scientist with maybe a white lab coat sitting in a laboratory and doing an experiment that can be repeated many times and always will show the same results. Therefore, we can call it a scientific procedure. That sounds very rigid, very straightforward, very logical, using perhaps mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology. It sounds like a very structured and very, a process which is very much rigid. And yet we're saying that there is a science of ecstasy, in this case, spiritual ecstasy. And the individual might ask, how can you think of ecstasy? And by the way, every time I'm going to say the word ecstasy in this presentation today, I'm not referring to the drug ecstasy that people take to get high and dance all night or something like that. We're talking about an ecstatic feeling. It could be extremely powerful. It could be a very wild ecstatic experience, but still an ecstatic sensation that a human being may have without any drugs, without any, chemicals or whatever. So when we're talking about ecstasy, if it's spiritual ecstasy in this case, or even if we're talking about ecstasy that comes from other sources, such as, for example, sexual ecstasy, the sexual union can also cause ecstatic feelings, as we know. So how can we understand ecstasy with the word science put together? Is there a science of ecstasy? It doesn't sound, because ecstasy as an experience, most of us equate that with a kind of wild feeling, a kind of pleasurable overall experience, a kind of chaotic thing. Your nerves are firing up, your brain is producing all kinds of chemicals, you are woohoo, kind of almost orgasmic, feeling all over the place. And then we would say, how can that be a science? Otherwise said, how can there be a science for the experience of ecstasy, even spiritual ecstasy, as we ask in this way? This can be obviously a very confusing, conflicting concept. And actually, it sounds like it. However, the yogis and the tantrics of India and Tibet have proven that it's not conflicting. In fact, it is indeed the truth. In other words, through the practice of yoga, through the practice of tantra, through the practice of various techniques such as asanas, pranayamas, mudras, bandhas, and especially the practice of kundalini and the sexual practices of tantra, the practitioners of yoga and tantra have managed to not only access randomly states of ecstasy, like when suddenly in a meditation or something, you go into an ecstatic sensation, you think, wow, I feel like I'm on drugs or something, but I'm actually just meditating. I didn't obviously take anything. They not only discovered that this is possible, now comes the point, they actually discovered that there is a system that can take you there repeatedly as a scientific experiment. That means it is a beaten path It is a process that is 100% verifiable and can be achieved again and again. That is the beauty of it, and that's the mind-blowing thing. And this is not just my opinion. I'm telling you this as a kind of introduction to the subject, but actually, if we go a little bit deeper, you will find that when you study the teachings of various spiritual masters, from Milarepa in Tibet to Shivananda in India to many of the tantric practitioners of Kashmir, such as Abhinavagupta, Kshemaraja, Utpaladeva, and continuing with the practice and reports from practitioners from other traditions, such as Sufi masters, such as, for example, Rumi, the famous Sufi poet and enlightened master, continuing with many of the practitioners from the Tibetan tradition, and looking again and again at many of those spiritual masters. All of them are telling us the same thing. The state that they reach through their spiritual practice, when they go to higher and higher states of consciousness, they all say the same thing. It is an ecstasy. They describe it as a spiritual ecstatic experience, as a trance kind of experience. The technical name given to it by the yogis is a state of samadhi. Some call it simply as enlightenment, although the word enlightenment can be a little bit misleading because many people think enlightenment is a kind of simple thing. I was sitting and then boom, I became enlightened. It's like, it's a very kind of simple on-off switch kind of thing, which is of course not the case. Enlightenment is a graduation of different levels of consciousness. Some people can have beginning levels of enlightenment, which is not bad, but it is still child's play compared to the higher levels. And then there are even higher and higher and even higher levels of enlightenment, where indeed the yogi or the tantric can reach levels which are far, far from anything that we can describe with words. Why am I telling you this? Because those are ecstatic levels which are so high that indeed words are not enough to describe them. That is why many of the masters, some of them I have mentioned the names already to you, including Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Yogananda, and many others, when they try to describe those high states that they've reached, those levels of enlightenment, what could they say? Not much. They resorted to poems. Because when you are on a very high level of consciousness, you actually surpass the functioning of your mind. The logical function, the analysis, deduction, all those functions that the mind has suddenly become useless because you go into a level which is beyond the mind. And at that high level of consciousness, how are you going to describe it? You're going to say, well, I experienced a certain amount of light, and then suddenly there was a feeling on my left side, and then I perceived the universe like this and like that. This is diminishing it to some intellectual experience, like some visualization technique. That is not what it is, of course. You cannot say Buddha reached enlightenment, but actually he was just sitting and doing some visualization of the universe and the planets and the trees, and that's what it all is. It's just a visualization. That's nonsense, of course. Reaching to those high levels of consciousness, the state of enlightenment, is an experience which is total. It's an experience that leaves the mind behind way back. And what you are left with is ecstasy, very similar in many ways to sexual ecstasy, even to a state of orgasm. That's why we put the question, is enlightenment a cosmic orgasm? Because, for example, even Osho, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, the famous neo-tantra practitioner that was, very famous all over the world, Osho was saying that enlightenment is a cosmic orgasm. And other practitioners in Tantra have agreed on that. In other words, it has been observed that when a human being is reaching a state of enlightenment, it has a lot of similarity to the orgasmic state. In other words, an ecstasy is the beginning levels of enlightenment. This is the shocking thing that you discover as you go deeper into these teachings. For example, in the state of orgasm, as we teach in our tantric workshops, as many of you know, some of you I think participated, especially in the Tantric Sexuality, especially in the massage workshops that we do, especially the Tantra Massage therapist course that we do. It's a 10-day course where we explore these things in a very practical way, because that's the thing. You can talk about it for hours. I can give you this lecture and you can talk about, yes, I understand spiritual ecstasy and I think I get it. An orgasm is a cosmic thing. If you do it in yoga, it's like a cosmic orgasm and all that. But you don't get it. You don't get it at all. All you have is words. All you have is some logical connections that your mind has created, but you don't really understand what it is. It's like if I'm going to talk to you today about how does an apple taste like, and let's assume that none of you ever ate an apple in your life. None of you has ever had a chance to taste an apple ever. And I'm trying to tell you, well, an apple is a bit sweet, sometimes a little bit sour, then it has a texture like this and like that. And you're all going to listen and say, well, I think I understand. But you don't understand. You will never understand until you have an apple in your hand, you take a bite, and then, oh, wow, now I get it. It's like, phew, it's an overall experience. I feel it completely. Now take that apple sensation experience, multiply it by infinity, and then you will understand even a little bit what we're talking about when people keep talking about enlightenment and trying to make sense of it without actually experiencing it. In order to experience it, you need to walk the path that the great yogis and the tantrics have laid behind, and that's why we call it a science, because by walking that path, this is not a chaotic path where you just go and you say, well, I did some wild meditation and I think I got there. Or I think I did a few pranayama techniques, or I did a little bit of yoga. I think I'm enlightened. Yeah, I'm sure I'm there. I'm positive. Yeah, I think it is. That's not how it works. There is a very clear and structured path to reach those high levels. That path can be through the tantric tradition or through other yogic practices. Of course, there's a path also through certain religions, such as through the Sufi tradition. There's a path to reach it in the Islamic tradition. There's a path even in Gnostic Christianity. There's a path that you can find in Tibetan Buddhism. So yes, and other types of Buddhism, of course, Theravada Buddhism and so on. But of course, all those other paths are paths which can be somewhat slow. They can take many, many decades, because those are religious paths, and by definition, they are for the masses, and therefore it can take a long time to progress there. But the yogic path, and especially the tantric paths, these are paths which are what we call the highway. These are like the fast lane path, and that's why they are not for everyone. Not every person is built to go on the fast lane. Unless you have, let's take the example of a car, unless you have a car that can drive fast, consistently, sustainably, and manage to do it safely, you won't go on the fast lane because you know your car drives relatively slow, it's not strong enough yet or whatever, then you're going to take the slow lane. That's why those fast lanes, the tantric, the yogic paths, these are paths which are not for everyone. Unlike what people tell you today in the new age environment, oh, everybody can do it. We just sit and do a dancing meditation. We're going to hold our hands and scream and take your anger out, or do a wild, I don't know what. Let's do it for my friends from India that we've talked about it just a few weeks ago. Let's do a unicorn meditation or whatever. And you think I'm there. Yes, I'm sure I'm there. I think I got it. I'm enlightened. Yes. Why? Because why not? That's not good enough. When we're talking about the meditation practices, the yogic and tantric practices of Tantra and Yoga, these yogic practices are a very technical, practical, powerful, and a very clear, like a science, the science of spiritual ecstasy, the science of spirituality. whereby walking this path, as many yogis walked before you, many tantrics walked before you, you can reach exactly the authentic ecstatic sensation, the enlightenment sensation that we are talking about, that the yogis of yore have reached, the tantrics of yore have reached. That's why there have been yogis and tantrics that, using the techniques either from tantra or from yoga, because you can use both depending on your proclivities, what fits to your structure, then you are able, by using these techniques, to actually achieve that state consciously, in a controlled level, not chaotic, not wild, not totally all over the place, but something which is really clear. And as you step through these systems, if you take step by step this system, then you can reach to that state. And when you enter to that ecstatic state, that state is mind-blowing, indescribable, as I said, but it is repeatable. It becomes something which you achieve and you can access at will. And that's the incredible thing. There is no accidental enlightenment. It is true that there have been some rare cases in the history where some people, because of past life experiences, because of some weird karma from their past life, they may have accessed that kind of a level of consciousness, and it didn't make sense. It was like, wow, that was an accident. It's not really an accident. It's because of some past life karma, but those things are extremely rare. But when we're talking about the average person doing their practice and trying to achieve those high states, we are talking about a practice which is a very clear path. And walking this path in the yogic or tantric path, as I've mentioned, it is possible to achieve those states. This is not a maybe, it is 100% possible, but it requires a few things that unfortunately in modern times are not so available anymore. Number one, it requires a teacher or a guru who has reached those states themselves. Nobody can take you there if they have not been there themselves. It's not logical. It's like a guide that wants to take you to a certain place, I don't know, in the jungle or something. And you ask that guide, can you take me there? And the guide says, I hope so. I've never been there, but let's give it a try. That's not going to end well, especially if you're going in the jungle of ignorance of today, and for most people forever, this is the case. So that's not going to work. So you need to have a guide who has been there, preferably repeatedly has been there, and knows exactly how to take you there. So that's why a teacher or a guru is always praised in all the ancient tantric and yogic texts as the number one thing. You must have a guru in order to reach there, a teacher who can take you there. That's number one. Number two, you need to actually dedicate your life to it. Now, this is a big hurdle. A lot of people would say, oh, whoa, hold on a minute. I mean, it sounds interesting so far. I'm even willing to forgive you for saying the word guru. That sounds a bit new agey and cult-like. Oh my God, guru, what the next are you going to say? And now you're telling me what? I'm supposed to give up my life in order to do this? No. I would prefer to just take a weekend course somewhere, a weekend for enlightenment. I'll give you a weekend to fix me up quickly to take me to enlightenment, but I don't think I can devote too much time because, I have to have some parties and use my Facebook page, and I've got kids and I've got a job and a career, and these are important things, and I'm not going to just throw all this away just for your weird promise of enlightenment that who knows if I'm even going to get it. And then many people say, no, I'll just find some quick weekend course, or maybe I'll study it for 1 year or something, but that's as much as I can give you. Well, I'm sorry to say that's not good enough. All the great yogis in the history and the tantrics, they were not, part-time enlightened people or part-time yogis, where I was working in a pizzeria most of my time, but part-time I also did a little bit of yoga or something along those lines. That doesn't work. The sad story for many of people would be that actually they're not willing to devote their life to it. And I'm not trying to scare anybody, but this is how it works. They say it, for example, in the old traditions. They say if you don't give God the first place in your life, God will not take the second place or the third place or any other place. Now, I'm not trying to say the word God in some cultish, I don't know, religious fanatic way. It's just the way the adage goes. All I'm saying is that we need to give enlightenment, if you want to call it that, or the spiritual aspiration of yours, or your divine needs, you need to give them the first place. There is no other way. It doesn't mean that you can't have a life. Other words, you can other way you can have a life. You can also perhaps do a certain job, maybe to sustain yourself. We live in a world where we need to have money, we need to have food, we need to have our basic things. Why do I say we live in such a world? Because believe it or not, spiritual aspirants like sadhus and yogis and tantrics in ancient times in India did not have to do those things. They would be considered like an aspirant after the divine, like a spiritual practitioner, where the local king would sponsor you. The people would sponsor you. Look at Thailand today, which is still to a degree a spiritual country, where monks from monasteries, they don't need to work for their food. They go in the morning and beg in the local area, and everybody happily will give them enough food for the whole monastery, so you can devote your whole day for spirituality, for spiritual ecstasy, where it's not considered something you should be ashamed of. Oh, I'm begging for my food, what a poor person I am. Not at all. It's considered to be a privilege for the local community to support the monks, because they know if I support the spiritual practitioners of my country, these people, men and women who devote their lives for spirituality, they meditate, they do spiritual practice, they reach enlightenment, and that makes the whole country much higher in vibration. That makes all of us much more morally strong, ethically strong, more thinking pure thoughts, less crime in the world, less this, less that. And basically it's like a symbiosis between the spiritual practitioner and the average individual, which makes for a much more spiritual environment. That's how in the old days things were. But in modern times, if you walk around and tell people, I don't have a job because I meditate all day, or because I like to stand on my head and do a little bit of yoga, maybe I needed chanting some spiritual things, people would tell you, either go get a job or we're putting you in a mental institution. What is this nonsense? People don't understand it in modern times. And that's why we don't have too many options. We need to do some work. We need to do some things to sustain ourselves on the spiritual path. And that's what we do. So, of course, you need to give spirituality the number one place in your life. There is no other way. But yes, you might need to find a way to combine it, balance it with some average life where you work and you do things in order to sustain yourself. But don't lose yourself in it. That means don't lose yourself in the daily life and then say, okay, I'm doing some golf, I'm doing a little bit of aerobics, I go to the gym, and I do a little bit of yoga, like it's another hobby that I have. No, your spirituality must be the number one thing in your life. And that is how you can walk the path of spirituality. You can do the science of spiritual ecstasy and indeed reach spiritual ecstasy. You can reach those high states that all the yogis have reached. It's not lost. We can do that. But we need to do that understanding that this is the main thing in our lives. There is no second place for any other thing. That's the priority. That's what we have to do. Now, having said all that, then how exactly is it that we call it ecstasy, or as I presented it, a cosmic orgasm, when we talk about enlightenment and all these things? What is the connection between ecstasy or orgasm and these things? To understand how orgasm or ecstasy is relevant to the subject of spirituality, we need to study a little bit more the Tantric path. In the Tantric path of India and Tibet, Tantra is a science which deals with energy. As many of you know, you've been in my courses before and you know this. It's energy because they consider that everything in reality is energy. And when we speak about energy, the tantrics have said that out of all the energies in nature, the highest, the most powerful energy, the most potent energy is surprisingly actually the sexual energy. Because the tantric realized that when we are able to bring the opposites inside of us, the minus and plus energy, the yin and the yang energy, and bring them together, what happens is that we reach the zero polarity, which means that we can go into a higher state of consciousness. And that is exactly the beauty of the tantric sexuality. Many people think tantric sexuality is all about, you know, conscious relationships, or I don't know, some kind of heartful connection, finding my soulmate, or I don't know, unicorns and butterflies. This is all nonsense. I'm not saying Tantra is not aware of some of the things I just mentioned. I'm just saying this is not what tantric sexuality is actually about. Tantric sexuality is about the actual union of the opposites in the human being, bringing a person to higher levels of consciousness through the union of the opposites. And what would be the most classic and the most potent union of opposites that we can think of in reality? According to the sexual teachings of Tantra, this is the union which is the sexual union. When a man and a woman come together sexually, and they do this not as a average sexuality of, I don't know, having sex for the sake of pleasure and sex and nothing else, doing it with something else in mind, doing it with awareness of energy and controlling the energy. By doing it this way, the couple can reach states of sexual ecstasy. And that's the beautiful thing. Many yogis have said when they have reached enlightenment for the first time, like there was a great yogi once that entered a high state of consciousness enlightenment and came out of it, and his students were asking him, what did you feel, master, when you were in this high state of consciousness? His answer was a big surprise to them. He told them, actually, I felt that I was having an orgasm in every cell of my body, like a cosmic orgasm. And that's the beautiful thing about it, that entering those high states of consciousness can indeed be perceived as a state of orgasm. But of course, not the kind of average orgasm that many of us experience in the usual sexual life, because that is an orgasm which is usually quite superficial, very short-timed, short-lived, and we don't really have a chance to explore it properly. The tantrics of India and Tibet, especially the tantrics that explored the sexual energy practices, they discovered that actually the sexual orgasm is a opening to something much, much more than we realize. And that's why they developed the tantric practices of sexuality, because they realized that the orgasmic sensation, this ecstatic sexual sensation that many of us experience when we have the average type of sex, is actually a doorway to much bigger forms of ecstasy and orgasm and pleasure. And that's what the tantrics wanted to explore, not pleasure for the sake of pleasure, not sexuality for the sake of fun. They said, yes, you can achieve those things, but it can go bigger than that. And that's the point I wanted to make for you today. When you experience tantric forms of sexuality, and those forms of sexuality can sustain this, what you average people call orgasm, into something, it's like a doorway to a much bigger world of ecstasy, then you can even reach high states of consciousness. Even enlightenment can be reached through the sexual practices of Tantra. And that's why in our school what we do is we teach sexual Tantra in the form of Tantric Sexuality as a course, which is usually a 5-day course, because what I told you right now is not even touching the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to understand of how you can become a Tantric man or a Tantric woman, and that happens in the Tantric Sexuality course. But more than that, because I know for most people the course itself is not enough, because you want to actually experience it. Can I feel those sensations in my own body? Can somebody help me to feel that? You can, and that's why we do the Tantric Massage courses, especially the TMT, the Tantra Massage Therapist course for 10 days. It's not necessarily just to make you a therapist. These are courses where we explore, we teach theoretically, but a lot of it is practical. Through the knowledge and the art of touch, the Tantric Massage, we can learn how to awaken in ourselves and others those ecstatic feelings. And then that's why we had many times in our Tantric Massage courses, especially the Tantra Massage Therapist course, those 10 days courses, many women and even some men, because for women it's more easy in these courses, that they suddenly access orgasmic sensations they never knew possible before, because they learn how to awaken it in themselves and in others. And that's exactly the way that we can progress in the tantric path. Of course, it's not for everyone. If you're not interested in studying the tantric or yogic sexual teachings, that's totally fine. There's also the hatha yoga teachings. There's also the kundalini yoga teachings. There's also other forms of tantric practices which are actually belonging to tantra. Many people don't know this, that hatha yoga, kundalini yoga, and laya yoga and other forms of yoga are actually part of the tantric path. These are tantric yoga type of teachings. And it's not only, many people think that the sexual teachings are what Tantra is all about. They don't realize that it's only 5% of Tantra. That's it. There's much more to Tantra which has nothing to do with sex directly. There's like many other things from, as I said, Kundalini, chakras, Laya yoga, colors, meditation techniques. So many different things are there. And we teach all of them in other practices. Like, for example, some of my students have been very mind blown by the teachings that we gave, which are called Kashmir Shaivism. I'm going to teach it next year in Greece. And if you come there, you will see those are, and I can say this with hand on heart, this is an incredible truth. And it's, for me, 100%. These are the highest teachings I've ever received and I've ever given in spirituality in my life. And I've really explored many forms of spirituality. And I can tell you Kashmir Shaivism is the top of the top, the creme de la creme. It is mind-blowing, and it's not for everyone. So be aware, only if you feel solid, spiritually devoted, and you really want to explore these things, you're welcome to join us in Greece, where I'm going to take you there. This is a very, very intense, very powerful teachings. It's the teachings of enlightenment in the highest degree possible. So as you can see, when we talk about ecstasy include many things. There's the ecstasy that you do when you just take a drug or something, which is superficial, chaotic, and never gives you anything permanent. It's just like a silly high. There's the ecstasy that comes from sexuality, which has the possibility, if you follow the right techniques and practices in Tantra, to take it to a cosmic orgasm, to a kind of something mind-blowing that can change your life. There's also ecstasy that comes from your practices themselves, like doing Kundalini, doing meditation. You can reach in your practices into a spiritual ecstasy. All these things are similar. As I told you, that great yogi felt that his meditation, his enlightenment state, felt like an orgasm in the body. You can see all those different ecstatic states from sexuality, from meditation, from yoga, from Kundalini, from Laya yoga, from Kashmir Shaivism. All those ecstatic states actually are overlapping a lot. It's not like this is my ecstasy from yoga and it's different from my sexual ecstasy and it's different from my Kashmir Shaivism ecstasy. No, many of those lead you to the same top of the mountain. These are like different paths up the mountain which lead to the same top of the mountain eventually. And that is why a bhakti yogi, a tantric yogi, a raja yogi, a tantric yogi, a Buddhist yogi, it doesn't matter. You use different techniques, different paths, but they all eventually meet in the same place. As long as you give spirituality the first place in your life and not say, oh, I'll do it if I have a little bit of time later. No, it's the first place in your life. And as long as you have the right teacher, the right guru, you have the possibility to reach the same top of the mountain and reach spiritual ecstasy. And yes, therefore, there is a science of spiritual ecstasy. It is true that enlightenment can be perceived as a cosmic orgasm. All these things are there. You need to walk the path and find it for yourself. There are teachings available. If you want to do it with us, you're more than welcome. We have very soon, I think in a very short time, we have a Tantra Massage Therapist course that we are presenting in Estonia. Liisa is going to teach exactly these techniques of how to experience these things in yourself. Actually, we're doing some promotions for these things. So if anybody's interested, please contact our team and you will see. For the ladies, I think we have some lovely discounts and options. So please check this and see if you're interested to experience some of it. Of course, it doesn't mean that in one 10-day course you will experience cosmic orgasm or ecstasy of that level, but at least you'll take your first steps there. You will find what actually an orgasm means from a tantric perspective. For some people, they even experience it in a 10-day course. Others at least have some openings, and you can take it from there in your personal practice. So that's what I had to say. It's a very big topic. Of course, there's so much more to talk about. What exactly is the tantric practice? How do you use these teachings? How do you feel when you meditate and go into higher states? What kind of techniques can be used? There's a lot to be said. Of course, this is not something for a Facebook Live event. This is for a serious course where you sit and study properly, when you get the teachings and techniques and you do them together with a teacher, with a partner, whatever. This is where these things can go to the next level. So this is what I had to share with all of you today. I hope this was interesting for you. And next, it's time for a little bit of Q&A, as many people, I'm sure, have questions with regards to this. This is always a very fascinating topic. So I'll start taking some questions now, and I'll answer them as best as I can. So let's start with some of our questions. Let's see, we have Michael Peters asking, is it called orgasm because we are lacking a word that can truly describe this special experience? It's true, but let's not forget that the word orgasm comes from Greek, from the Greek language, and it means something. Honestly, if memory serves, it means actually something spiritual, but let me just have a quick look. A good question, I don't want to miss on that. One second. I just want to tell you here. Usually it's referred to, it says here as sexual climax is the usual understanding of it, but it actually comes from the Greek language. I can't remember right now the actual meaning of it. I believe it refers to, it comes from the word org, which means to an impulse, an excitement of sorts. It's like an effervescence in the body. I just had to make a quick check here to give you a best answer. So indeed, we're talking about a kind of impulse, which is nothing else than a spiritual impulse. So the amazing thing is the word has a meaning, and do your research. Honestly, I don't want to give you the wrong answer here, but it does have some origins in the Greek language, and it is of a spiritual nature. So that's why, funny enough, it's a word that has a meaning, but you are correct by saying that it is still a word, and it cannot describe the experience by any shape or form. That's why everybody knows when you do experience an orgasm, it feels like something so overwhelming that for most people, actually all of us, unless you're a tantric and you train with this, the sensation is so overwhelming that usually we lose the sense of self. Many people, when they're in the middle of an orgasmic state, you can't just say, God, I'm orgasming, and then actually my name is Johnny and I'm doing this and my job is that and I don't know what. You can't. When you're in that state, if somebody asks you your name, you're like blown away. It's like you are in a different place. You can't even remember your own name. This is how intense it is. It takes you beyond name, beyond form, beyond labeling, beyond anything, actually beyond the mind. And that's why it is, in fact, a kind of a spiritual state. I hope this answer gives something. Moving on, Karen is asking here. Let's see, where's the question? How does yoga work alongside religion? For example, if you're a Muslim and your faith plays a major part in your life, how can you make both yoga and your religion beliefs and practices a main priority? Actually, it shouldn't be a problem at all. Think of yoga as a spiritual system which is not of a religious kind. It's neutral. That's the beauty of yoga. It is a neutral system. It's like if somebody would tell you, should I pray or should I don't know, do some jogging, and does that work together with my religion? Why shouldn't it? If you pray, it can support any religion. Any religion practice involves prayer. If you do jogging, for example, that's the physical part. I'm just trying to give different options here. Nobody can say, oh, if you do jogging, you can't fit it with your religion. It's neutral. It has nothing to do. In the same way, yoga is a spiritual practice, but of a neutral kind. You do yoga, it will only enhance your Muslim or Christian or whatever religious practices you do. It will just enhance them. It will support them. It will not cause any issue. And that's why it's easily combined. Don't think as yoga as a competitive religious practice, because it's not. Even it's not just me saying so. For example, even Mircea Eliade, a professor in the 1930s, who went to India and did his PhD on yoga and Tantra, after many years of studying it, he declared clearly, he studied it to a very extreme level, and he declared yoga and Tantra are not religions 100%. This is not a religion in any way, shape, or form. And that's why it's an assistive practice that can be used tremendously helpful in your religion, with your religion, and it does not compete at all. I hope this is clear. Moving on, D is asking, can enlightenment be understood as a permanent state of peace? No, no. Again, to define enlightenment or to reduce it to one word or one state is like taking a cosmic, ecstatic experience beyond belief, which is infinite, and say, can it be understood as no thoughts? Can it be understood as just a good, nice state of peace? Can it be understood as tranquility? Can it be understood? No, it's all of these and a million, gazillion, infinite more than that. It is not something that can be defined by words. So a state of peace, a state of ecstasy, a state of that. Even when I say ecstasy, it doesn't describe it even close to what it really is. So that's why we cannot just diminish it to one state or another. It is something beyond the mind, beyond intelligence, beyond whatever you think you understand. The second you say, I think I understand it, you didn't. You don't understand it because you use your mind. It is beyond that by far. Gail is asking, can you elaborate on the effects, where was the question? Yeah. Of meditators in a community and how it can affect or influence society? Well, for example, even basic forms of meditation, such as the famous TM meditation, transcendental meditation, which is not too advanced. There are much more advanced forms of meditation in yoga and Tantra, but even such a basic form of meditation, which has been done by a few thousand of people together, like in New York, in some cities in the world, they sometimes have conventions of TM meditators. They have checked and verified that after 1 month, where 1 hour or a few hours a day, a few thousand people sat together and meditated, the effect on society was measurable. They even checked with City Hall and discovered that for that month of convention, where these people meditated every day, the crime rate has reduced by 30%. If I would be the mayor of such a city, I would pay a few thousand people to meditate every day for the whole year round, because it reduces your crime rate by 30% or more. Isn't that amazing? So this is just TM meditation. What about if you do more advanced forms of meditation? Definitely the effects would be incredible on the whole of society. That's why in ancient times in India, kings, and this has been registered in the chronicles of various kingdoms of India, kings would have this way of thinking. A king would say, I do not have enough sages, enough meditators, enough enlightened masters, gurus in my kingdom. I only have one, or I have zero. And then they would go and send emissaries to other kingdoms and ask humbly to bring gurus to their kingdom, because my kingdom doesn't have enough gurus, doesn't have yogis or meditators. Please come. And they would pay lavish amounts of money. They would buy them houses. They would put them as part of the kingdom court, the court of the king, in order to make sure that we have wise men and women enlightened, not just wise, but enlightened spiritually. Otherwise, I cannot have a proper kingdom. This is how they were thinking. For example, Abhinavagupta, who was the greatest master and enlightened being of Kashmir, was not of Kashmir originally. He was brought there by a king, the king of Kashmir, asking humbly, can the great master come to my kingdom? Because I don't have enlightened people. The kings of old considered it to be a lack It's like, my kingdom is not complete without a master, because how can the people be inspired spiritually? How can the people live a proper life if we have no gurus and masters in our kingdom? This is how it was taught in old days. So definitely the presence of an enlightened being, and preferably a few enlightened beings, and I'm not talking about the new age nonsense that every Tom, Dick, and Harry thinks they are enlightened just because they did a few ayahuasca rituals, or because they, I don't know, saw fairies in the night, or because they talk to unicorns. I'm not talking about bullshit like that. I'm talking about authentic enlightened masters who really reached enlightenment and confirmed by spiritual giants and tell you, yes, you are indeed reaching there. That kind of people can have a huge effect on a country. So the more enlightened people in a country, the more things are transforming. The country goes higher and higher. Today, unfortunately, there are very few true and authentic enlightened people left on this planet. Many of them don't go public. They don't try to make themselves publicly known. So we don't really have as many. Today we are in Kali Yuga, the science of the Yuga, as I've described it to many of you in various courses. These are the cosmic cycles. There was the golden age thousands of years ago, more than, I don't know, 12 or more thousands of years ago it ended, actually more than that. And the ages have turned from the golden age to the silver age to the copper age, and now we are in the iron age, which is the worst age on this planet spiritually. And the bad news is that we are at the end of the iron age, which is called Kali Yuga, not yoga, Yuga, according to the Tantric tradition, because the Tantric texts describe this very clearly, the different ages and yugas. And at the end of the Iron Age, the end of Kali Yuga, we don't find many enlightened beings on this planet. There's a lot of fake enlightenment. There's a lot of fake spirituality. There's an overflowing amount of fake spirituality and New Age nonsense. But authentic spirituality is virtually gone at this time. And that's why society today in most countries is in a bad state. Because what we have is materialism, what we have is ignorance, what we have is superficiality, what we have is topsy-turvy, where people worship the wrong things and they despise the spiritual things. We have a very, very difficult time today on this planet, and that's why it is not so easy to find spiritual masters anymore. There's a lot of fake ones. You can go online on YouTube, you'll find plenty of spiritual masters with lots of opinions, but to find true, authentic, enlightened masters is not as easy as it used to be. I have met a few spiritual enlightened beings in my life. I have searched for it, but I can tell you I had to sieve through a lot of nonsense to find the real deal. So just to elaborate on this, I hope this clarifies. Shauna is asking, when you say you must dedicate your life to reaching enlightenment, is there an average time limit that it takes serious practitioners to reach their goal? For example, someone in modern day who still has to work and sustain basic life needs, but puts their practice as number one otherwise. It's a good question, and indeed, it has been asked many times before. If a person puts certain number of hours a day, it's as simple as that. If you put a certain number of hours a day to your practice, and if your practice is a real one, not a fake practice or a misguided practice of the New Age nonsense, if we're talking about authentic spiritual practice, then yes, a certain number of hours a day will provide a certain effect. What is the ratio? If we want to be practical, that depends on your practice. Our style of yoga practice, it requires a minimum of 2 hours a day for proper spiritual progress. Minimum. If you do 2 hours a day, in some years, you will get more and more progress, and then you will get developed more as you study, because it's not just doing the practice, you also need to develop in your curriculum. We have a curriculum that we offer, and then you get more powerful techniques, because you can't stay with the same techniques forever. Certain techniques you've reached success in, and then you get from your teacher the next level technique, and next level pranayama, and next level kundalini technique, and then you practice with that for a few years, and you get better and better and better. That's the way it goes. And if you go with that approximately 2 hours a day with advancing in the techniques, it can take some years. With 2 hours, you can reach some good success in 12 years. Some people, it takes them a bit longer because still the modern time is very challenging. You might reach even, in some cases, it takes 16 years. But to reach enlightenment and full bliss and liberation in 16 years might seem a lot for some people, but actually it's not that much time. Some people study medical, go to become a doctor and a medical practitioner and spend 10 years in university, another years, some years, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, depends on which country, practicing in some hospital before you are approved as a PhD, MD, professor of medicine, and they consider that a big accomplishment. Well, it is a nice accomplishment, but compared to enlightenment, it is nothing. And then some people say, oh, but to study 12 years or to do practice for 12 years, 16 years to reach enlightenment, that's too much. To be a doctor, that makes sense. But enlightenment, no. Why not? Enlightenment is much more profound than just becoming a doctor. So, of course, I would say that's worth it. I've devoted more than 20 years now, actually more, since 1996, it's 22 years of my life to this. And I've had some good success. I don't want to say enlightenment or whatever. I've had my results. And it came after a certain number of years, and it was worth it. I could have spent my time being an attorney, a lawyer, which I was before that, but I didn't feel that that's my path, and I'm never looking back. I'm actually super happy that I left my law work as a lawyer, as an attorney behind, and I've devoted my life to spirituality. Trust me, it was worth every minute of it. Trust me. So, just to give some ideas. If a person wants and has the time and energy to devote more than 2 hours, let's say you do 3 hours, it'll be less years. If you do 4 hours, already you can get results in much faster time. If a person devotes more than 4 hours a day, the effects would be much faster, but then it's very difficult for most people to have a regular lifestyle with, you know, kids and work and whatever. If you do more than 4 hours a day, it's very challenging. You need to become more of a loner and really devote your life to it. So I hope this gives some perspective to it. Moving on, Jekko from Denmark's asking, I have Tantra Massage next week with a woman who is a bodybuilder to a high degree. She has breast implants. Is there special requirements I need to take as a therapist? Well, there could be, but honestly, in this talk, we are not going to look so much into Tantra Massage advice. This we give and we teach in all aspects of it in the TMT, the Tantra Massage Therapist course, and we explain there a lot of these things. But overall, when a woman has breast implants, that can cause a lot of blockages in the area of Anahata Chakra. Then it means expect blockages in this area when you do Tantra Massage. If she's a bodybuilder, then it could show that her Muladhara will become strong, the root chakra, but it also can also create certain blockages because the muscles in many cases can be developed in ways which are not normal, disproportionate, and that can cause a blockage in itself. There could be a lot of insensitivity. So think about these things, keep in mind as you do the massage. Moving on, Tiffany's asking, so can someone reach enlightenment through sex? Is it permanent or only a glimpse? The sexual tantric teachings, not regular sex, but tantric sexuality can lead to high states of consciousness and even states of enlightenment. But tantric sexuality, by definition, doesn't put you in a state of enlightenment permanently. You enter it through some sexual practices in Tantra and can glimpse into it, as you say, that's a good word, temporarily. But if you repeat these things, and if you support that with spiritual practice, with meditation, with certain Kundalini practices and so on, and do the Tantric sexuality on the other side, altogether these practices can lead to repeated experiences, which can eventually, after some time, can take a few years, will become more and more of a permanent result, and then it can indeed become permanent, yes. But it's not something that happens just like that. Shauna's asking, how many enlightened beings are on the planet at this time? Would you estimate? Since I know Shauna is a Capricorn, I understand these very technical questions with numbers. That makes sense. But there is no survey that has been done, or some kind of a, what do you call it, when you actually check the numbers of people who did this or that in a certain country, there's no survey of enlightened people. Because first of all, this is not something that any government wants to measure. They consider the whole thing nonsense. And second of all, not many enlightened people actually expose the fact that they're enlightened. There is no enlightenment club where we put a name tag and I'm enlightened and whatever. So this doesn't work like this. So it's hard to really define it in this way. But I would say that overall, we're not talking about as many as some people would consider. It could be in the hundreds. It could be perhaps in the thousands, but I wouldn't say that much more than this. So it doesn't sound like much, actually. If I would say, I don't know, there's only 500 enlightened people on the whole planet of 7 billion, that's pathetic. I mean, that's not a lot. If I would say that there's 1,000 or maybe 2,000, it's still not a big number. We cannot say 100%. I do know from my time spent in India many years that there are enlightened people in India, for example, who live in the Himalayas. Some of them live in the south of India, in isolated places. Some of them refuse to meet any people. They don't want to be teachers. They just want to sit, meditate, and support the world on a subtle level. And how can you measure these things? That's why it's very difficult to give exact answers with this. We need to simply accept it, that there could be, by the hundreds perhaps, maybe a few thousand, but not more, on the whole planet, and maybe less. So really, this is hard to say. I hope this gives some general idea. Ben from Israel is asking, the Kriya Yoga tradition talks about the yugas in terms of hundreds or of thousands of years, and according to them, we still have about 120,000 plus years for Kali Yuga. How does it work compared to the Tantric tradition that says we are at the end of Kali Yuga? By the way, this is not only the Tantric tradition, also in the Vedic tradition and other traditions, they confirm what I said. But on the other hand, when we talk about Vedic astrology, and we do know that Yukteswar and in the lineage of Yogananda, they used certain form of Vedic astrology, they usually refer to the Mahayugas. These are bigger cycles, because the cycles that I told you is not the end of it. There are cycles which are, as I describe, about 6,400 years for each yuga, which complete a 25,000 cycle or so of the 4 yugas, leading to a bigger yuga. And then there are the Mahayugas, which are 25,000 repeating themselves, and they are given names as well. And in some traditions, they are given the same names. As Satya Yuga is the big cycle, Kali Yuga is a big cycle, and so on. So these are cycles within cycles. In some astrological traditions, they only measure the biggest cycles, and they call them cycles of 120,000 years or whatever, bigger and bigger ones. And they don't consider much the smaller cycles in between. These systems that I'm talking about, this tantric system and so on, they speak about the smaller cycles of 6,400 years repeating themselves, and those are the cycles I'm talking about, and we give them the same names of Kali Yuga, Satya Yuga, Dvarapa Yuga, Treta Yuga, and so on. And that's why the confusion is there. Same names, they're given to different length of cycles. I consider our system more relevant because it's much closer to our lifetime. I mean, how does it help you to know that in 120,000 years or maybe more than that, some big cycle will change on this planet? For your daily life, for your yoga practice, for your meditation, this is like useless. What can I do with that? Yeah, it's kind of an intellectual exercise, but it doesn't really help me much. If we're talking about the cycles much more relevant to us, if I'm telling you that Kali Yuga, this cycle we live in today, which is spiritually very low and very challenging, which we all experience in our lives, the challenges, is about to end and we are at the end of it. Maybe it's another 5 years, maybe it's another 10 years or something, and it's ending and then things will change. That's much more relevant for you and for me and for everybody else. And that's why definitely it's much more wise way to look at the cycles, and it's more actual and relevant for us. So that's why I'm referring to the cycles in this way. I want to say it was a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today about these topics. These are so interesting and spiritual topics. And I hope this was interesting for all of you. So I'm going to stop here, and we are going to conclude our session for today. So thank you all very much. I hope you will have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world, and see you next time. Thank you.